right, everybody, get ready, because we are about to take a deep dive into economics today.
It's going to be an exciting one.
You know I love this stuff. We are going to be looking at the work of R.F. Harrod, specifically his ideas about how economies grow.
Yes.
Not just in a static way,
Right.
but dynamically over time.
And this is really interesting because you have to remember, this was 1939
Oh, yeah.
when he was writing. And most economic models at the time were very static, like a snapshot.
They were frozen in time.
Frozen in time. They weren't dynamic systems.
Yeah, it's like trying to understand, the entire plot of a movie like Avengers Endgame from a single still image.
Exactly.
You get some information, but you miss the entire story.
You miss all the action. And that's really what Harrod was going for.
Totally.
He wanted to build a model that captured that motion, those ups and downs of a constantly changing economy.
And that's where this idea of the guaranteed growth rate comes in, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
What is this? Like the holy grail of economics.
Yeah.
Some magical number.
Yeah, like a magic number, exactly.
Yeah.
So this is that rate of growth.
Yeah.
Where everything just hums along perfectly.
Okay.
Where there are no shortages, no excess goods gathering dust.
Right.
Just enough to keep everybody happy and everything moving smoothly.
Okay, but how do we find that perfect pace? What's the secret recipe? What goes into it?
It's actually surprisingly simple.
Okay.
It boils down to two main ingredients: how much people save and how much they invest in new factories and equipment.
Oh, okay.
So it's about that balance.
So if everybody decided right now to just save a ton of money, like under their mattresses, would that slow things down?
That would absolutely slow things down. Because suddenly businesses have less demand for their products.
Makes sense.
They might need to cut back production, maybe even lay off workers. And, that's why finding that guaranteed rate, it's so tricky. It's about matching people's saving habits.
It's got to be a balance, right?
With just the right amount of investment to keep everything moving smoothly.
I see. Okay. So we've got this balancing act. But if this is a guaranteed rate, why are we even worried about instability? Shouldn't it just inherently guarantee stability?
That's where it gets interesting. You see, Harrod argued that even though this growth rate exists in theory, actually achieving it is a whole other story.
Wait a minute. So this perfect rate, this thing we're supposed to find, could actually be the thing that makes the economy unstable.
It can be a source of instability.
Now, that just seems cruel.
Yeah. It's like trying to balance on a tightrope.
Okay.
While juggling chainsaws, you need absolute precision.
Okay.
Any deviation from that guaranteed rate, even a little bit, can send things spiraling.
Oh, boy. All right, so give me an example. Say we're all happily chugging along at this guaranteed rate, but then something happens.
Yeah.
What could throw us off?
Let's say businesses misjudge the market, and they overestimate demand. So they ramp up production, invest in a bunch of new equipment, hire more workers.
Sounds good so far.
Yeah. It all sounds great, right?
Right.
But then they realize they've overshot the mark.
Uh-oh.
And now they're left with a surplus of goods they can't sell.
So what do? They have to, slam on the brakes,
Exactly.
cut back production, lay off those same workers they just hired.
Exactly. And here's the thing.
That's terrible.
It gets worse. That slowdown, that reaction, can actually become a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Oh, no.
Because other businesses see the economy contracting.
Right.
And they get spooked. And so they start cutting back, too.
Yeah.
And then it just creates this domino effect.
Oh, wow. Okay, so even if everyone is trying to hit this perfect rate, the tiniest little wobble, just a slight miscalculation can send the whole system into a tailspin.
You got it. It's like the economy is just waiting for an excuse to freak out.
Oh, no, this is making me nervous.
Yeah, the delicate balance.
So we have this guaranteed growth rate that is about as stable as a house of cards in a hurricane.
Yeah, it can be a little precarious.
What are we supposed to do? Just cross our fingers and hope for the best?
Well, if only it were that easy. Harrod recognized this, that actually achieving and maintaining a stable growth rate is a major challenge for any economy.
Right.
And to make things even more interesting, he throws in another factor.
Okay, hit me.
Long-term investments.
Oh, yes. Those big, huge projects that take years and years, even decades sometimes to complete.
Exactly. Things like building a massive high-speed rail system or a nationwide rollout of 5G internet.
Right, these huge infrastructure projects.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And these investments, they're not directly tied to how many shoes or gadgets people are buying today. They're about building for the future, right?
Right, but they still had a huge impact on the economy in the present, don't they?
Absolutely. They create jobs, they stimulate all kinds of industries, and in the long run, they can completely reshape how an economy functions. It's like giving the entire system this massive upgrade.
Okay, that makes sense. But how do these long-term investments play into this whole guaranteed growth rate idea? Is it like adding another chainsaw to our tightrope act?
Well, it definitely adds another layer of complexity. Remember we were talking about how maintaining that stable growth rate is all about finding that delicate balance between saving and investment.
Yeah, that perfect balance.
Long-term projects can really disrupt that balance, sometimes for the better and sometimes not.
Okay, so they're a double-edged sword.
They can be.
So how does this work in practice? Give me an example.
Okay, so let's say a government decides to embark on a massive infrastructure project, right?
Okay.
They're injecting billions, maybe even trillions of dollars into the economy.
Yeah.
Suddenly there's this huge surge in demand for construction materials, for engineering expertise, for skilled labor.
So that's a good thing, right? More jobs, more economic activity.
It is. It definitely can be. But it can also lead to something we call overheating.
Uh-oh. Overheating the economy.
Yeah. Imagine if that surge in demand pushes the growth rate way past that guaranteed rate we were talking about.
Oh, okay.
Suddenly you have shortages, you have bottlenecks, inflation starts to become a real problem.
It's like trying to fill a tiny teacup with a fire hose. Too much, too fast?
That's a great way to put it. It's too much, too fast. And that's where those unintended consequences come in.
Okay.
Harrod really understood this, that these large-scale investments, while they can be transformative in the long run,
right,
they also introduce this whole other kind of instability. They can create these big economic swings, periods of rapid growth followed by these sudden slowdowns.
Because the system just can't keep up, can it?
Exactly. It's trying to adjust and it just can't quite keep up.
So it's like we are trying to steer a ship through a really narrow channel during a hurricane. So we have to deal with the wind and the waves, but now we also have these massive rogue currents coming from these long-term investments.
Yeah, I love that analogy. That's a really great way to put it. And that actually leads us to another really important concept in Harrod's work that can help us understand how to kind of navigate these choppy economic waters.
Yeah.
And he called this the natural growth rate.
Okay, so you've got the guaranteed rate, which at this point seems like more of a good luck with that rate.
Right, exactly.
And now we have the natural rate. So break this down for me. What's the difference?
So think of the natural growth rate as kind of like the economy's speed limit.
Okay.
It's the maximum sustainable pace that it can maintain over the long term.
So it's like the difference between a car that can technically hit 200 miles per hour.
Okay, yeah.
Versus one that can comfortably cruise at 70 all day long.
Yeah, you got it. That's a perfect analogy. The natural rate, it's determined by things that are, for the most part, outside of our immediate control. Things like population growth.
Right.
Technological progress, and, the availability of natural resources. It's the rate at which an economy can grow without running into constant bottlenecks or overheating.
Okay. So where does this natural rate fit into our tightrope walk here? Is this a safety net or something we should be actively aiming for?
I think of it more like a guidepost.
Okay.
Ideally, you want that guaranteed rate, that short-term balance we were talking about, to be just slightly below that natural rate.
Okay.
That way, you're encouraging steady, sustainable growth, but you're not pushing the economy past its limits.
So we're driving just below the speed limit, but not so slow that we're causing a traffic jam.
Exactly. And you might be thinking, well, what's the harm in pushing past that limit now and then? A little extra speed never hurt anyone.
Right.
But Harrod would argue that when it comes to the economy, exceeding that natural rate for too long can have some pretty bad consequences.
Like what? Are we talking economic fender benders or full-blown crashes?
I think it's more like pushing your car too hard for too long,
Okay, yeah.
Eventually, something has got to give.
Right.
You might overheat the engine, wear out the tires, or even cause some serious damage. And in economic terms, exceeding that natural rate can lead to inflation. It can lead to these unsustainable bubbles.
Oh, wow.
And it can even lead to a recession.
Okay, so I think I'm starting to see the bigger picture here. It's all about finding that sweet spot, that Goldilocks zone.
Yes, exactly.
Between pushing for growth, but not getting too far ahead of ourselves.
Absolutely. And this is where things get really, really interesting when we start talking about the role of economic policy.
Because if even a guaranteed rate can be unstable, it seems like policymakers, they really have their work cut out for them.
They absolutely do. And that's what we're going to explore next, how Harrod's ideas about economic growth and instability can help us really understand the challenges and sometimes the unintended consequences of trying to manage something as complex as a national economy.
So we've spent all this time talking about these two rates, the guaranteed one, which is all about this short-term balance, and then this natural rate, which is kind of like the economy's speed limit.
Exactly, yeah.
But if even the guaranteed rate, if that one is wobbly, how do policymakers, how do they even wrap their heads around this?
It's a huge challenge.
Yeah, it's like they're trying to, steer a supertanker with a tiny little rudder.
It really is.
In the middle of a hurricane.
And you've got a bunch of people on board giving you conflicting advice.
Exactly.
About which way to go.
And they're like, oh, by the way, there might be icebergs.
Exactly.
So how do they even begin to approach this?
Well, this is one of the things that makes Harrod's work so important. He really stressed that policymakers have to understand that this system, it's inherently unstable.
Oh, okay.
There's no magic formula, and there's no one-size-fits-all approach.
Right. You can't just, copy and paste what worked in the past.
Exactly. Every situation is unique.
Right.
So what's the playbook then? How do they even start? Well, for Harrod, understanding these different growth rates.
Okay.
That was the crucial first step.
Okay. Gotta know where we are.
Exactly. Once you understand how instability can emerge,
right,
then you can start to think about using policy, things like interest rates, government spending, even those big long-term investments we talked about, to try to nudge things in the right direction.
So it's like they're not really in control so much as they are nudging.
It's more like nudging, yeah.
Trying to keep things relatively stable.
Exactly.
But they've got all these different levers and buttons they can push and pull.
And figuring out which one to use and when.
Right, exactly. Do we adjust interest rates this month, or do we announce a new infrastructure project?
Exactly. And this is one of the big takeaways from Harrod's work. He argued that the effects of those policy decisions, they can be really counterintuitive.
Really?
What seems like a surefire way to boost growth in the short term might actually backfire in the long run.
Okay, now you're just messing with me.
No, it's true.
Give me an example. How could something that's supposed to be helpful actually end up hurting us?
Let's go back to those big long-term investments we were talking about.
Okay, yeah, the infrastructure.
On the surface, they seem like a no-brainer.
Right. Create jobs.
Jobs, stimulate demand, modernize the economy.
What could go wrong?
Right. Exactly. But
there's always a but.
Always a but. Remember how we said that guaranteed growth rate depends on that balance between saving and investment?
Right. Okay.
Well, if the government suddenly borrows a ton of money to fund one of these huge projects, it can actually crowd out private investment.
Crowd out. What does that mean?
It means that businesses, seeing those higher interest rates because the government's borrowing so much, they might be less likely to invest in their own projects.
Oh, I see. Because it's more expensive to get loans now.
Exactly. They might hold back on building a new factory.
Makes sense.
Expanding into a new market.
Wow. So the government trying to boost the economy could actually end up with less investment overall.
It's one of those weird economic paradoxes.
Right. It's counterintuitive.
It is. It seems like it wouldn't make sense, but...
Right, because you think, oh, more is better.
Right, exactly.
But in this case, it's like, maybe not.
Exactly. It's all about understanding the system as a whole.
It's a reminder that, wow, economics is complicated.
It is complicated.
There are always these trade-offs.
Always trade-offs, always those unintended consequences.
It's like that old saying, you can't just do one thing.
Exactly, it's all connected.
And that is why this work by Harrod is still so relevant today.
Absolutely.
It reminds us that there's no easy fix.
Yep.
There's no silver bullet solution. It's not that simple.
When it comes to managing economic growth, it's about navigating all these different factors, this incredible complexity.
And being able to adapt.
Yeah. So, wow, this has been an incredible journey.
It has been fun.
Really diving deep into the ideas of this brilliant economist, someone who is really grappling with these fundamental questions.
Absolutely.
About how economies work, why they grow, why they sometimes, stumble.
He asked all the right questions.
It's really given me a lot to think about.
I'm glad to hear that.
And for our listeners, if you're feeling a little overwhelmed, and I wouldn't blame you.
I wouldn't either.
The key takeaway here is that the economy, it's not a simple machine.
It's not a simple machine at all.
It's more like a living, breathing, complex organism.
It's an ecosystem.
And just like any living thing, it's capable of amazing growth.
Resilience.
but it's also susceptible to instability.
And even illness.
Yes, exactly. And understanding how all of that works is the first step towards making more informed decisions.
Absolutely. Both in our own lives and as a society.
Well said.
So on that note, we're going to leave you with a final thought-provoking question.
I love a good question.
If even a guaranteed growth rate can be unstable, should we even be aiming for stability?
That's a good question.
Or is a certain amount of, controlled chaos
interesting.
actually necessary for progress and innovation?
Something to ponder.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep asking those tough questions, and keep diving deep.